I stood in this exact place and served notice that Ghana will move a motion to declare the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity. This current draft resolution is a result of months of consultation and consensus building by continental bodies, nations, experts, scholars, and jurists, with the sole aim of achieving a united front and grounding the final outcome in truth, compassion, and moral conscience, remembrance, education, and dialogue. So today we come together in solemn solidarity to affirm truth and pursue a route to healing and reparative justice. The adoption of this resolution serves as a safeguard against forgetting. It also challenges the enduring scars of slavery. Madam President, let me conclude with two significant quotes by two great leaders of history, one of them white and one of them black. The former President of the United States of America, Theodore Roosevelt, said, and I quote, "With a great moral issue involved, neutrality does not serve righteousness. For to be neutral between right and wrong is to serve wrong." Again, civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King also reminds us, and I quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." We've traveled this long road, each step guided by a desire to be better and to do better, each step bringing us closer to the kind of world we would want to. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ghana and senior government officials, the chairman for this occasion, Osaberima Kwesiata II, who's the paramount chief of the Ogoa traditional area, Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you for joining us at the African Burial Grounds this morning. Thank you very much. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus are here. Let's recognize you. Thank you very much. And for one of time, let me recognize our brothers from CARICOM, from Africa, and from everywhere in the world. Recently, someone asked me to explain the importance of the resolution on the declaration of the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. And I responded without pause or hesitation, and I'd like to share what I told him. This resolution allows us as a global community to collectively bear witness to the plight of about more than 12.5 million men, women, and children whose homes, communities, names, families, hopes, dreams, futures, and lives were stolen from them over the course of 400 years. I speak these words today not only for Ghana, but also in solidarity with the rest of Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the wider diaspora, and indeed, all people of good conscience throughout the world. This resolution is a pathway to healing and reparative justice. This resolution is a safeguard against forgetting. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, violence begins with language. When words are weaponized or to codify abuse, when people are called out of their names, regardless of their state of dress, when slaves were captured, they were always stripped of their clothing while being kept in the dungeons of the fortresses that had been built on the African coast by the European traders. They were forced with their limbs chained and shackled into the hold of cargo ships. They remained naked, packed like sardines during the month-long journey through the Middle Passage. Not all those who were loaded onto the ships survived the voyage. A number of the ships sank with their entire human cargo. Others who fell sick were thrown overboard. And a few who preferred death to captivity voluntarily jumped overboard. It is believed that 10 to 20% of enslaved people died in the Middle Passage.
Very emphatic statements made by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. You recall that this whole conversation on issues started way back in September 2025, where exactly the president stood before the UN General Assembly and made that announcement that Ghana's intention was to introduce a resolution that would declare the traffic of enslaved Africans as a grievous crime against humanity. Fast track, 6 months down the lane, on March 25th March 2025, the UN General Assembly actually adopted that resolution, and the name tag has been given to it. But yesterday, a significant step was taken. There was a consultative meeting here in the capital city, Accra precisely, where a lot of things were discussed. A panel was mentioned as well. There have been some mandates that have been given these people. We find out what exactly went into that meeting. What is the quest for Africa as far as this whole reparation and justice conversation is about? Is it just going to be one of those quests that Africa chases and ends up with nothing? Exactly what are Africans requesting or asking for? If the damage has already been done, what amounts to the repairs? And the other side we should also be looking for, who benefits, who pays for all these damages? It's a conversation we will have right here on The Dialogue. Welcome, brace yourselves up as we go through this morning's edition of The Dialogue with me, Randy Ahadzi. Remember, this is your favorite current affairs program that airs every Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. My guests are ready via the internet, where they will join us with this conversation as well. But feel free to drop your messages under any of the live broadcast, and I'll read them out loud and clear. Let's take a quick break. When we return, I'll introduce them, and then we can set the ball rolling. This is The Dialogue. Stay with me.
Arrived at its destination, the enslaved people, still naked, were taken to the market, where they were inspected and appraised like livestock. They were then placed on an auction block in front of an audience of potential buyers and sold to the highest bidder. Once they arrived on the plantation where they would work and live for a lifetime, they were also stripped of their names. And so you were no longer Fatu or Kofi or Bubakar or Nanayao or Emenka, Nayong or Hamisu. You were given names like Ben, Jemima, John, Toby, or Mary. In addition to these new names, they were also called girl or boy, regardless of how old you were. And maybe I should also say that filthy N-word. If you ever needed a surname, it would be that of your master. And sometimes they were branded like cattle with the plantation's insignia or logo. There were sugar plantations. There were also coffee, cotton, tobacco, and cocoa plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas. South America had diamond and gold mines as well. And also the production of indigo took place in Jamaica. The people who were enslaved labored on those plantations from sunrise to sunset. And the conditions under which they worked were brutal. They were beaten occasionally to the point of death. They were underfed. They were kept in cramped quarters and often died young, if not from labor, then from disease. There have been records of some enslaved women who were kept as breeders. Let's not mince words, ladies and gentlemen. Business was booming because when labor is free, profit margins are huge. African lives were disposable. If too many of the enslaved Africans died, more were captured from their homes on the continent, enslaved and trafficked. During conversations about slavery, the point at which euphemisms are introduced, and there's a rush to talk about abolition. But we cannot afford to look away. This is precisely the part when we should pay close attention, because the devil is in the detail. And I'm going to share 4 trafficking destinations with you. Remember, when you hear these numbers, that it's not about data. These are about human beings and human lives. Roughly 6 million enslaved Africans were trafficked to Brazil, which is the 5th largest nation in the world, stretching 4,400 kilometers from north to south and 4,320 kilometers from east to west. Almost 2 million enslaved Africans were trafficked to Jamaica, which was the most profitable of all sugar-producing locations. Jamaica is 235 kilometers long and between 34 and 84 kilometers wide, depending on which point you're located.
All right, so welcome back. Many thanks for still staying with us right here on WoezorTV. Remember, this is the dialogue. Our conversation this morning is on reparations and justice. What is next for Africa, as I intimated earlier? Yes, indeed, the president made mention of quite a number of things that we ought to do. It's been long overdue. I mean, decades upon decades, we've been chasing this whole reparation thing. It was established and it was adopted. And indeed, it's time for that steps to be taken. And then yesterday at Accra, as I mentioned earlier, there was another consultative engagement where some adoptions were made, some decisions were taken, steps ought to be taken. Beyond that, what next? But there seem to be some more like bottlenecks, right? Issues about who gets to pay for the damages done in the past and in what form, who becomes a beneficiary. Now, others also argue from the point where, I mean, it is clear that the Caribbeans also tried this fight and they made their requests or their demands very well known. They made mention of issues of good health care, education, issues on infrastructure, and the others. But bring it down back to Africa. People will also say that, look, the individual countries have their priorities. If you're going to ask for repairs, what Ghana needs as a form of repair will be different from what Togo or Cote d'Ivoire or Niger would want. I mean, is that what we are looking at as a united front? Whilst at it, there are concerns also about the roles Africans even played in all of this slave trade. Who sold who for what? It's a question that we need answers for. But the good news is that a very significant step has been taken beyond just the talks that we have seen in the past decades. A step has been taken. Yesterday, the meeting was held. I'll bring to you the areas that the president touched on, what we need to look out for as well. But joining me for this conversation is Professor Abdullahi Kuyini Muhammad, who is a senior lecturer at the Department of Political Science, University of Ghana, and also Divine Amu, is a historian and also a lecturer at the HTU. Very unfortunate, a few others that we built for the conversation this morning were called back due to some other very urgent assignments elsewhere. But let me welcome Professor quickly. Prof, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm great, and thank you for having me.
Very well. Prof, let me start with you from where you sit. You look at it from a broader perspective. If we're talking about this entire thing on reparation and justice, can you explain that to the layman? What exactly is Ghana and to a large extent Africa chasing after?
Can you explain that to the There are several things that
Hello, Prof. If you can please lower the volume on your TV set, that will help a lot, so we can have the conversation, Prof. Okay. Well.
You just hear me?
Yeah, very well. It's better now, Prof.
Okay. Okay. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, so Prof, I am asking that you look at this whole conversation on reparations and Africa's quest to call for justice. I mean, what does this really mean in plain language to the ordinary African watching?
Yes, it means several things. The first thing it means is for us to understand, particularly young people who are growing. Many of us today, this generation, were not there when this slavery took place. But we have learned the history, we have gone to the castles, we have seen the dungeons, we have seen where our great-great-grandfathers and mothers. And therefore, it provokes a sense of desperation, a sense of wanting to know what really actually happened. And not only knowing what actually happened, but also the amount of consequences that were inflicted on us. So it tells us that probably if they were not chipped across Atlantic alone, our development would not have been like this. It tells us that those who have gone, that is those who have chipped across the Atlantic, what they face over there, and the devastation that it had here in us, that's very well. The other thing is about the identity laws. The identity laws in terms of those who were shipped across the various parts of the Americas and then Europe. That's what it tells us. Then it also tells us the double standard nature of the international community. So, for example, when there was the Holocaust, every year we celebrate about the Holocaust and think about reparation for those who were victims of the Holocaust. But nobody ever mentioned slavery. Nobody ever mentioned slavery. And slavery predated the Holocaust. So why is there a huge emphasis on the Holocaust, but there is nothing, not even an acknowledgement that it is done to Africans? So that's why we think about that. Reparation, not necessarily in the form of money, but reparation in terms of even understanding and acknowledging that they were guilt. When you mention guilt, then they say, oh, well, but your people were accomplices. But if you force a race, the mere fact that you contemplated the idea and came down to Africa, remember those who were even accomplices were forced into it. They didn't agree to do it voluntarily. So either they were enticed by something or they were coerced into it. So that argument about, oh, you were the facilitator of the crime is neither here nor there. So we are talking about reparation so that we understand where we are coming from at the beginning. What was done to us in the past, what consequences will linger on up to today. One of the consequences that link up to today is that you go anywhere, the African is not respected. Oh, you are slave, you are this, you are nigger, you are that. It's part of the consequences of this. Then the other part of it is that it derails our development, and because it derails our development, we are not able to catch up with other parts of the world. We could have developed at our own pace. People are arguing. So look at the countries in East Asia and other places. I know some of them also were colonized. But I don't think we are allowed to develop at the pace that you wanted to develop. You could maintain your culture, you could maintain your economic structures, you could maintain your political structures. We have all these structures in place. So if we're allowed to develop autonomously, then probably our development history and rate would not have been what it is today. So it is incumbent on us to know and to learn what happened in the past. Who suffered?
Prof, I'm grateful. I'm grateful, and that's well clarified, and that is something that we need to know. I mean, because you listen to arguments some Pan-Africanists mentioned as that we have lost an identity due to some of these heinous crimes that were perpetrated against our forefathers. But if you get to even know the identity, does that change the narrative of the African people? I'll come back to you on that. Let me bring in Divine Amu, who has also been, a very vociferous voice behind this whole call for reparation and justice. Divine, thank you for joining us this morning. Let me first take your initial reactions to the significant steps taken so far by Ghana and to a large extent the entire of Africa and this whole call for reparation and justice. Okay, Divine, I don't know if you are there. Divine, can you hear me? Okay, well, we will still try as much as possible to re-establish contact with Divine. Okay, Divine, I need you to lower the volume on your TV set, please. If we can just tone it down a little bit so we can have a clearer conversation. Prof has mentioned quite a number of things. He stated and explained into details what this whole reparation and justice call means to the ordinary African. Yes, we ought to know the crimes that were perpetrated against us in the 400 million years that Africans were enslaved. Yes, we have contributed to the wealth of the slave masters. It's time for justice to be served. But justice in which form? What exactly are we calling for as a people? Is it just about the identity? Yes, indeed, we are calling for artifacts. Would that change the economic situations of the African countries? Something we need to look out for. Divine, are you there?
I'm here with you.
Very well. I'm grateful. Thank you. Divine, and again, you listen to Professor Mohammed. He has illustrated, mentioned what we need to know as far as this whole reparation and justice call is about. From where you sit as well, what does this mean to you as a young African?
Randy, good morning to you and good morning to your beautiful viewers. I agree with Prof on almost every point he has raised. I must say that last time when we met, I acknowledged the joy that most Africans will have in the course of this battle against reparative justice. This is a lot for the current generation of Africans. I must also agree that the first point of call will be the education for current generation to understand the whole theater of the enslaved Africans that were removed from this continent across the Atlantic. In their numbers, we must understand the conditions. It is by this that we can appreciate the enormity of what has happened to the Africans and, of course, visited on them. I believe strongly that we need to understand the nature of the Africans that were taken away, the conditions under which they were used for the purpose of the development of the global world, which actually is very hypocritical about the whole idea of reparative justice when it comes to enslaved Africans. I agree with him when he said that the issue of 400 years of removing Africans from their home, their comfortability, from their development, from their sustainability across this Atlantic for the development of the West. The fact that this thing has been put under the carpet for all these years, whereas issues of Holocaust will be acknowledged even so many centuries after, this education should come to us. When we understand this, then we will appreciate why there is the need for this reparative justice. Now, my take is that beyond the enslavement, there was a deliberate, if you like, intentional calculation by the West to undermine the humanity of the African. Therefore, hiding the development of the African, therefore, hiding the intellectual ability of the African, therefore, hiding the technological prowess of the African from the whole world by removing artifacts of the African in addition to taking the people away from the continent. So then the reparation also is tailored into restitution. These artifacts are to engage the intellectual level of the Africans before the advent of the Europeans and the subsequent removal of the Africans from the continent to the other parts of the world. This will enable us to know and rediscover our personality as people that know the narrative in Eurocentric writings that we have always been inferior and that the presence of the Europeans will be the change or the game changer for the African to come near Homo sapiens or come near humanity. But even as it stands, their teachings, their cultural impact on us has not even moved us to that very level where we can also be regarded as part of the global humanity. Look, that is to say that the psychological implant by the Europeans through these two major acts, it will continue to affect our thinking that continuously we are second-class human beings in the world, or we are inferior to the Europeans or any other race, and then the African is nothing but just a common primate. These are the things that have been done to us, and so the reparative justice is not only limited to recognition, but it is also a process of rediscovery of the African personality that must be acknowledged by the global, or if you like, the hypocritical global world. That's for the reason I align with Kwame Nkrumah when he says that for the African to get to that occasion, to rise to that very table, to rise to that very theater, the African must rediscover his personality. So yes, these things, when the education comes back to us, it will enable us to appreciate our level of development before the suppression of the Europeans through both the removal of artifacts as well as removal of the Africans to the other parts of the world. So then the justice goes beyond just recognition. The justice goes beyond exchange of technology. The justice goes beyond financial compensation. The justice goes beyond racial discrimination, eradication. The justice is about the African to be humanized in the eye of the world as equal race as any other race in the world.
I'm grateful. Now, let me bring in Prof again. Prof Abdullahi, I mean, the question about if really this whole justice or the call for justice or reparation is anything to go by with, does that really change the narrative of the Africa, I mean, the African continent?
It's not about changing the narrative or when we talk about reparative justice. The first step in reparative justice is to even acknowledge that yes, there was a crime. Maybe look at the voting in the UN. 123 nations voted in favor of the motion. 3 rejected. They didn't feel that well there was any injustice done to Africa. The 52 abstained. So you put it to add 52. That means that a total of 55 nations didn't see the need to even acknowledge that there was harm was done to Africa. So that is very significant. We may think that 123 is a good. I was surprised because I was expecting about 99 or 98% vote in favor. But look at the total number of people. Put the number of people who abstained, we add it to the people who didn't voted no. That's a huge number. So all the collaborators didn't vote. All the perpetrators didn't vote. They abstained. That still means that a greater number of those who perpetrated the crime are not still willing to acknowledge that the harm was done to Africa. And that is a very, very important. So the first step towards reparation is acknowledging that indeed harm was done to us. So if a significant proportion of those who were the perpetrators will not acknowledge that indeed the perpetrators are against Africa, then that is a problem. But moving forward beyond just recognition, we're not talking about justice, reparative justice. We're not talking about just financial gain, give us some money and do that. No, that's not what we are doing. We are saying today in current Africa, across all parts of Africa, slavery, the abolition of slavery was immediately followed by colonialism. So that means that the struggle whole of Africa did not stop after slavery. It continued long after the end of slavery. And that quickly detonated the rate of development of Africa. So when we are talking about reparation, we are not saying that bring cash here and come and dole out to every individual African way here. That's not what we are talking about. What we are talking about in terms of reparation, the first step is that through the ship across the Atlantic alone, and the great sons and daughters are in the diaspora. The first thing is to acknowledge that yes, harm was done to them there. So even those who were left there, they were left to spend on their own. No school, no education, segregation here and there, black church, black school, black dad. That changed the civil rights movement, but it's not completely changed. So what they need to do is to acknowledge what harm had done to their great grandfathers, and then they are returned back to Africa if they want to reconnect with Africa, which they are because they send them there. That's the first thing. In terms of reparative justice, let them come back. Don't pull everything from them. It's just like the polling generation in Australia. So the take children, put them into foster homes, and they don't know their fathers, they don't know their mothers. What happened to Africans was that they people across the Atlantic, they mix a Ghanaian with a Zimbabwean, they mix a South African with a Togolese, so that you cannot communicate. And they know that Africa, we don't have just one language. We have thousands and thousands of languages. So they cannot communicate. So they lost the languages, they lost the culture, they lost everything. They don't even know where they came from. So if you ask the Afro-Americans to come back to Africa, where exactly is he going? Where does he know that his great-great-grandfather? So giving them the opportunity with their own family, to reconnect is the first step towards reparation. The second step towards reparation is to be able to get a monument with the recognition of the injustice that was done to us. This monument should be erected everywhere in Africa by those who were that is the first. The third part of the reparation is establishing socio-economic structure that will fast-track African development. Nobody is saying that bring money and put it into anybody's pocket. We have problems with infrastructure in terms of education, problems of infrastructure in terms of health, we have problems in terms of growth, we have problems in terms of communication development. That is what we have. Reparation means that they should not continue with the injustices that were meted against us in another guise. What is this guise I'm talking about? This guise I'm talking about is the fraudulent contract arrangement we have for our minerals and for other natural resources. So they come and sign a contract with you, you have the resource, they take 95% and you take only 5%. Or you take 10% and then they take 90%. And when you argue, they say, oh, well, we are bringing the money and we are also bringing the technology and we are going to bring the material and therefore you have to take 10%. So you have a natural resource that you have made you rich. But they still come with this guy. So today it's no longer guns and other things that is coming. What is coming now is paper. So they come with the paper, they make you sign an unfavorable agreement. That is still exploiting your resources. So it is a continuation of the statement in another form. So a step towards the policy justice is to make this arrangement with African countries more favorable to us, that will fast track our development. So what we're asking for today is that anytime there's going to be an agreement for any mineral resource to be extracted in Africa, it should be on terms that are favorable to us. So if we cannot even get 50 at all, but at least we should get about 30-40% of what we are getting. That will fast track our development. But they have come with another guy. Instead of holding the gun, they're holding the pen. So we're saying the second step of reparation is reconstruction of our infrastructure, giving us the capital to reconstruct our infrastructure so that our infrastructure will be in place, as I've said. The third one is this slavery in another guy. And that slavery is these fraudulent agreements that go around China in Africa. You see that recently our mine is going to, second mine is going to come up for renewal in 2027. And those who are here having the pleasure want another 20 years renewal. When we can exploit the thing ourselves, we have also developed the technology up to some level. Even if we don't have, we can hide. So that we can exploit the resource on our own. And then use that resource to fast track the development of Africa. So the slavery has come in another guise. The first part of the reparation that we need to also understand is to celebrate this injustice. So you see that there's a day for Holocaust. There's a day, Memorial Day for World War encounters, Second World War encounters. We must build such a Memorial Day here in Africa, so that those who were also perpetrators will also come and join us to celebrate it here, to acknowledge that our great-grandfathers were stolen from this land. That is what we need to do. The third part of reparation, and that will come from us, the fourth part, is to ensure that we instill this into the curricula of our schools, from the primary level up to the university level. Curricula should be there to teach our children how slavery occurs, what harm it did to us, why we are still struggling with it today, why today we are not recognized it across anywhere, any part of us, and nobody really actually respects us. So we need to do that. And in terms of their coming to build the infrastructure, they can do it the Chinese way, the Belt and Road Initiative. They can do it that way, so that they can fast track our development. That is the way to compensate for us. We're not saying even come and put the money in our hands. Even if you come with your equipment, with your things, to do the infrastructure for us, that would be a way to recognize that you did harm to us. You delay our development, and then we can then do that. The key part of the reparation is to recognize African inventions, African discoveries that have not been recognized. These are brothers and sisters, mothers and great-grandfathers who were put across their lives alone. Some of them, after the abolition of slavery, were able to engage in a huge number of scientific discoveries. It's there, whether it's engineering, whether it is astronomy, whether it is several fields of the endeavor. And they started, some of them who were the pioneers of some inventions, their names were obliterated from the records. As part of the reparation, they want to be restored, dig up the archives, and everyone who were Africans and they started inventions and discoveries that were buried and their names were never mentioned, to bring out the records and say that, yes, look, this person who was a black man or a black woman discovered that. That person who was a black man discovered that. We are going to restore that and give him all the accolades and benefits that come with it. Then that is part of the reparation. That is to tell you that, yes, we are recognizing it, they are recognizing it, they feel guilty about it, they are remorseful, and they want to send a new thing. That is a very, very important one for us. The third part is for them to also recognize that, look, to say that the Africans were the facilitators or even they went to the hinterland and captured their own gardens. That is a very wrong narrative. That narrative must change. If you coerce somebody into doing something, that's why they say that when evidence is extracted with duress, that evidence is not good evidence. In the same way, when you coerce somebody to go and commit a crime, because he knows that if you don't do it, he either will also be captured or be killed. Then he falls into it, so he's not doing it with his own free will. So that narrative must change. It must change from them. Some of them have already recognized that they have done. So for all parties who were involved to recognize and acknowledge that harm was done, I think the Catholic Church also has done it. Some other groups were involved. Some merchants were involved. These merchants may be to be identified and made to also give up their view of the harm that was done. Let them also confess and say that yes, we participated in the slavery, we did this, we did that, even though they may not be available, but their descendants are here. Their descendants can apologize on their behalf. The top part of the chief part of the reparation is for us as Africans themselves. We are sitting here now, we are talking to our previous government. What are we going to do to ourselves?
All right. Okay, Prof. Thank you, Prof. I'm grateful on that point, but there has been some advisory panel that was made. I mean, that was constituted yesterday. I'll bring you the breakdown of that, and then your view or your take on that, and also the way forward. For instance, they mentioned the Global Advisory Panel on Reparatory Justice, comprising heads of state and government, eminent leaders, and also public figures. And their role is to provide strategic guidance. To what extent, what will be the yardstick to measure this their outcome? There is also the panel on experts on the restitution of cultural artifacts. What does that also mean? The third one is the Global Legal Panel on Reparatory Justice, which will bring together distinguished jurists and legal scholars to explore legal pathways consistent with international law, human dignity, and justice. I'll come back to you on that, Prof, in a jiffy, but let me bring in Divine one more time. Divine, yes, it has been established, but again, whilst calling for justice, you would also want to look at the participants of the crime. Critics argue that all Africans are parts. So if there is going to be any repairs at all, they ought to share that repairs and pay for it. Is that not a fair argument to raise? Now, whilst at it, others also raise the concern that back in Africa, whilst we are fighting for this reparation and justice, our own brothers and sisters in an African continent are fighting their own friends, their own brothers, over what we can't really tell. Then where lies the exact fight or the quest for reparatory and justice? Divine.
Thank you very much. I believe strongly that the point raised by Prof to answer this, that the narrative or the literature created by the Europeans and Americans and imposed on the world to say that the Africans themselves participated, if not the Africans selling their own brothers to them, to be thrown under the carpet. It should be left for the dogs to devour. That answer is already good enough for us to move away from that very debate or that argument. The fact remains that this was a structural frame that was designed in Europe and imposed on us. We agree the church then, the Pope, gave the sanctity to it, and it kills everything. Now look, it is a right thing to do. And so, as Prof said, if you are coerced to go and bring your brother and you refuse, you are likely to be taken away. That is it. It's just like the scenario of the partition for Africa, of course, which is also a residue of the same framework, that our forebears resisted and fought many battles, but they lost all of them. What did they do? They used divide and rule tactics, using Africans against their own brothers. So whatever it is, at the end of it all, whether we participated in it or not, that structure was going to be imposed, and definitely the Africans will be enslaved or removed from the continent. So and to the extent that many of our own today are buying into the idea that we participated in it, we need to educate them to understand that this was imposed and structures were put in place to make us be part of it. That our forebears were giving guns, they were giving gunpowder. Why they sold gold and others to them, instead of them to reciprocate same, they were giving guns and others for them to wage war and kidnap and hide their own brothers for them. So the fact is, if you do not bring the business, if you do not initiate the business, question is, how will others participate in it? So we don't come to the end result when we do not understand the initiation of that very result. The initiation of the result or the creation of the result is the first thing we have to look at. Who created it? The Europeans created the structure. So it is not about that. We must accept that they use us as a conduit to achieve this planned thing. And so the argument that we participated in it should not be there at all, because it was a design. It was a design. Then we move from there. We must also understand how this design continues to live, even beyond the abolishment. Then they structured us into cash crop production. Then Prof mentioned coloniality. Now, coloniality was just the oxygen that was to continue the slave trade. In physical presence of the removal of Africans, they ended it. But how do you continue the economic survival of the Europeans and Americans? Then the issue of coloniality will come. Even when coloniality was removed in a political form, they continue with a neo-coloniality. As Kwame Nkrumah may put it. As we speak today, we produce goods that we do not sit on table to price the goods. And our resources remain the oxygen for the survival of the European economy, for the survival of the American economy, for the survival of even the Eastern economies. So we must understand that it is just not an issue where somebody wants to blame us. I will call it a victim prey theory, that they want us to blame ourselves, and forever they will not acknowledge the atrocities they visited on us. So I think that narrative is removed from day one. We should not go there. And those of our own who believe strongly that our participation should cater for, or if you like, should equate the work of the Europeans or the enslavement of the Africans by these Europeans is neither here nor there. It should be removed from our theories.
Now, Mr. Amu, let me stay with you, and I'll throw that same question to Prof, even though I would want him to tackle the three panels that were made yesterday or constituted yesterday. But let me ask you this question about the major, beneficiaries of this entire slavery or the slave trade back then. You talk about the EU states. England is in there, Germany is in there, France is in there, and a few others who were the major slave masters or colonial masters as far as Africa is concerned. They didn't even vote. They abstained from this entire voting or the resolution at that time. Where then does justice come if indeed the people who perpetrated these crimes on us have decided not to even acknowledge, like we are saying, acknowledge the crimes they have committed? Why then are we fighting for it?
So that is why the debate cannot end on the voting that occurred in the UN district. It cannot end there. We must continue to. In fact, as we said, Portugal participated and benefited so much. France, number one. Britain, number one. Spain, very much involved in it. And these are the very people, EU members, who refused to vote and hypocritically acted as though we are not for, we are not against. When you are not for, you are against. They are as equal as United States of America, who said that we do not recognize it. So then we will not end it there. When you look at the number of people who voted for the motion, they are in numbers significant, but in principle less or irrelevant, because the very people who perpetrated this refused to recognize and absented themselves from the vote. It is the reason we should continue with this very debate. It is the reason we should continue with this argument. It is the reason we should continue with the crusade, so that we continue to set the agenda for them to recognize. I understand the presence of President Macron, Emmanuel Macron, to speak to issues of reparative justice. In one way or the other, it is the heat that is still on them. They must recognize it. They perpetrated it. If there should be compensation, it should be coming from them. So if they refuse acknowledge, we will continue with the crusade as we are doing now. What we are doing now is part of the crusade. It is not the end in itself. It is the beginning of the end to this very issue of reparation. So yes, those people who have not recognized it are the major players in it. And so we will push on and make sure that they recognize it. And I believe from there, what we can look at the way forward.
Throw the same question to you. I mean, looking at the major beneficiaries of this entire slave trade thing, Germany, France, United Kingdom, Portugal, and the others, these countries abstained. I mean, yesterday we heard from Macron anyway, but these countries abstained. That's to tell us that they don't appreciate or acknowledge the crimes we say they have perpetrated on our forebears. Are we not just doing a wild goose chase?
Cannot be a wild goose chase. If it is, at the end of the passing of the resolution, would have ended it there. The debate would have ended there. The conversation would have ended there. Why is it that Macron is here today to speak to it? Why is it that after the voting, the Pope will acknowledge the participation of the church? So yes, you may look at it today and say, no, we should end it. No, I believe the continuous creation of this very awareness, the continuous conversation will one day bring everybody to the table to acknowledge that we have not done this against humanity in a good form.
Panel that was constituted yesterday, 3 different panels with different mandates, way to go, and I'll run you through that. The Global Advisory Panel on Reparatory Justice, and this is what they are made of: heads of state and government, eminent leaders and public figures to provide strategic guidance. The second one is expert panel on the restitution of cultural artifacts, supporting the return of cultural properties, archives, sacred objects and historical treasures to their rightful communities. And the third panel is Global Legal Panel on Reparatory Justice, which will bring together distinguished jurists and legal scholars to explore legal pathways consistent with international law, human dignity, and justice. Prof, these are the 3 panels that were constituted yesterday. Now, I am looking at the issues that we have been bedeviled with over the years. Issues of corruption, so rife on the table in Africa. With all of this, looking at the composition, can we really achieve this?
Yeah, so there are 3, as you said, there are 3 panels. From what I've heard from you, I didn't listen to the conversation yesterday about this. But the first panel is simply advisory to provide guidance to the last 2 panels. But what is most critical here is the one that is supposed to actually work and then hammer out the policy proposals for the palliative care. And that composition is global. The second one is about the heads of state. Yes, heads of states are important because they are supposed to implement whatever is hammered out by the third panel. So the third panel is actually the working group in drawing up proposals, draw up protocols, and drawing up policy proposals that will be the cornerstone of what the reparative justice modalities should look like. So they are all important, but most importantly are the experts who are going to work on it and hammer out the policy proposal. That is very, very important. Now, each of them are important because they will keep the momentum going. They tell us that this is there, this is what we are doing, and their work to be publicized. Their work will not just be on the quiet notes somewhere in the corner. Wherever they are reached in terms of their mandates, we need to know. It should be broadcast so that everybody will know that this is the stage that we have reached. But all these that we are talking about, if these perpetrators themselves do not acknowledge and come to the table to work with us towards the restitution of justice and reparation. So how can we make them to work with us? We still have a leverage to let them work with us. What leverage do we have? We have leverage in terms of our natural resources. Africa is a basket of natural resources, huge abundance of natural resources. In some places, for example, in Congo, there are rare minerals that is not found anywhere. And these rare minerals are the important components for the building of the tech industries everywhere, the innovations that are happening in the world. So, apart from China, Congo stands out as one of the most important center points for the supply of rare minerals. And if you look at all the other African countries, particularly Ghana, South Africa, and other places, there are many minerals. Look at that: gold, manganese, diamond, bauxite, cobalt, lithium, and we're discovering more oil. So there's still a very huge leverage we can use to bring them to the table. Now, how can we bring them to the table and eventually make them sign to it? What we can do is to stamp our feet and say that from now onwards, no exploitation of the African resource will begin or will be renewed or will be commanded without an acknowledgement, or whoever is standing here from the government, particularly those who were the perpetrators, without first acknowledging that yes, harm was done to Africans in terms of slavery, not only in terms of slavery, in terms of colonialism. And that would be to be enshrined, it should be included in every other protocols we are going to sign in relation to our minerals. That is the way to force them to come to the table. So if they are coming here to exploit any mineral, the first thing we need you to do is to acknowledge that harm was done to Africa. Is to acknowledge that slavery was the greatest crime that was committed against humanity. So if we are on this standpoint, then we can get them to commit. So that's the first thing we can do to make it workable. The second thing we can do to make it workable is to continue to cover and then to campaign for membership of all the members of the UN to also put pressure on these 23 ministers who abstain, who are the perpetrators, to sign up. So that's the second thing we can do.
Prof, and Prof, that is where, I mean, not to cut you short, but that is where I come in with the issue of what we are seeing with our brothers in South Africa. I mean, we should have a united front and a united voice. Should that not be what Africa should be doing in this entire fight for reparation and justice?
Oh, your line is... Hello? Hello?
Yeah, Prof, can you...
So what I'm saying is that...
Yeah.
You went off a bit. So what I'm saying is that I even acknowledge in my first submission that I did. First, as Africans, we must be part of the process through which this restoration and restitution justice thing will happen. If we are not united ourselves, if we don't have a common vision, then as Africans, it will be difficult for us to be able to extract any concessions from the developed world who are the perpetrators. So yes, what the South Africans did was a huge blood on our move forward as a united people. But we can still mend the fences. We can still mend the fences. We need to bring, that is why we have the AU forum. So the AU forum, even though people in the past have said that it's a talking shop, we can begin to let it have teeth to bite. So if South Africa is part of us in the AU, and this has happened, what has the African Union done? I was expecting the African Union to call South Africa to question. It didn't happen. And that's where I was disappointed. So if we have effective leadership at the AU level, then we can still call South Africa to reason. Tell them that there will be sanctions if they continue to treat fellow Africans this way. And at the EU level, we need to open up. We are still too restricted. Look at the EU. You can cross anybody anytime, at any time of the day or night. That's what it is. If you want to force anybody in Africa here, it's like trying to take any piece of muscle from the mouth of a lion. It's too combative. So the first part is for us as AU to be able to dismantle these barriers that we have so that we can move between countries. More people and goods can move freely. If every African is performing very, very well, and the leaders are working very well. I don't see the reason why you should fear your African way standing there. So there's much to do by the EU to be able to ensure that this unity of Africa that Kwame Nkrumah wanted to have can become a reality in our age. So the AU has a very important responsibility to perform. Not only the EU, but the regional bodies in Africa, like the ECOWAS, like the SADC in South Africa, so many East African economic area, the North and others. So each of the regional blocks have to ensure that this unity in Africa is forged. So the first point when we go to the AU meeting is to ensure that this thing we are talking about, this monthly boundary border, should happen and happen quickly. This thing that we are talking about, unity, the trading among ourselves, the forging of friendship among ourselves, football matches, trading associations, and all that, cultural exchanges, scientific exchanges, to happen more between Africa rather than between Africa and the developed world. So if we start on that note, then we can use that as a springboard to ensure that these things that they are working, the panels, what they will come out with their output will become reality and we can implement it. So my point is that, yes, we still have leverage to be able to bring this perpetrators of slavery to come and account. If we insist, and all African countries will take that point, that you can't come here to exploit in Africa without first acknowledging that slavery was the deepest harm that was done to Africa. So that's the starting point.
Thank you so much for your time this morning, Professor Abdullahi Kuyini Muhammad. He is a senior lecturer, Department of Political Science, University of Ghana. Prof, thank you so much for making time for us this morning. We appreciate it. Very well. Very well. Let me wrap up with you, Mr. Divine Amu, as well. And the question about justice. To you, what would justice look like in the coming years?
Justice will mean first recognition by those who committed the crime. Justice will be that EU members will be impressed upon at the UN level, as Bob said, just as Franklin Roosevelt impressed upon Churchill in the course of the Atlantic Charter for the self-recognition of the Africans that they should be given independence. Same should be forcefully pushed at the global level so that these very people who perpetrated this crime against us will recognize their crimes, their mistakes, their faults, and acknowledge it. And that will be first form of justice. Then the return of the artifacts of Africa which were deliberately taken to undermine the intellectual development of Africa before the presence of the Europeans and other races on the continent here, those artifacts should be returned to the Africans. Is one other form of justice. We also expect that the world will sit at a table, just as in the Luxembourg 1952, to carve the construct or the framework for the compensation of the Holocaust to the Israelites. Same will be done to Africa. Again, the reparative justice should go beyond the global level, and Africa should recognize the role they play in the development of the world, that they are the citadel of the world resources. Why would their resources benefit the world without benefiting them themselves? So I think that very conversations will be had, and that we should come together in the minds of the early creators of Africa after the colonial presence, and then assume the positive position of unity among us, and that will be internal justice to be done to us. I heard you speak to the issue of Afrophobia in South Africa. Very important. We should acknowledge that in one way or the other, these things will happen, even in our homes, brothers and sisters, at one point, we have our differences. We should leave them behind us and come as a united front and fight these injustices being visited on the Africans. By this way, we are able to get there. It's a process. It's just not a destination. We have just started. That is why I said earlier that this is just not the end, but the beginning of the end. I am very optimistic that one day we will be there.
One day we'll be there. Mr. Divine Amu, thank you so much for your time this morning as well. Viewers, there you heard Divine Amu. He is a historian and also a lecturer at HTU. Also jumping on this conversation on reparation and justice. Before we go, yes, the French president spoke yesterday on this issue. Let's take a listen to His Excellency Emmanuel Macron.
Durant ces 3 jours de travail, vous poursuivrez une réflexion essentielle, celle qui a été engagée à la suite de la résolution adoptée par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies le 25 mars dernier, lors de la Journée internationale de commémoration des victimes de l'esclavage et de la traite transatlantique. Je veux le dire avec force, la France a entendu le message porté par cette résolution qui fait profondément écho au travail engagé depuis longtemps par notre pays, notamment depuis l'adoption, il y a 25 ans, de la loi reconnaissant l'esclavage et la traite comme crimes contre l'humanité. Si la France s'est abstenue, ce n'est ni par indifférence ni par retrait, mais c'est parce que nous demeurons attachés à une conception universelle et universaliste de la mémoire des crimes contre l'humanité, vigilante à ne jamais établir de hiérarchie dans l'horreur. Pour autant, je ne veux laisser s'installer aucun malentendu, esclavage. Ce travail se poursuit ces dernières années. Nous avons structuré cette fondation. Nous avons continué d'avancer. En 2027, la France inaugurera au Trocadéro, lieu où fut adoptée la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, un mémorial dédié aux victimes de l'esclavage, car la première des réparations est la vérité.
Hopefully a transcribed version will be put out on our socials for you to watch as well. Basically and essentially what Emmanuel Macron sought to say is on this whole reparation and justice core. And I'll just summarize a few of the pointers. He mentioned that, the French leader noted that reparations can take various forms and should focus on preserving historical memory while acknowledging the suffering endured by enslaved people and their descendants. He further mentioned that, or explained that, reparative efforts should include resolving historical grievances that continued to affect nations and communities today, citing France's ongoing engagement with Haiti as an example of addressing the long-term consequences of slavery and colonialism. So, I asked that question about who becomes the direct beneficiary, who determines what ought to be paid to the victims. So France and Haiti, one way or the other, could find a path out. The French president also mentioned that reparations also involves the ability to work out situations, as we are currently doing with Haiti, and it can be approached from multiple perspectives. But in no case should it be seen as an endpoint, a check written to bring the story to a close, he mentioned. So it means that the conversation will linger on. It was started decades ago. Here we find ourselves with President Mahama leading the charge, and other African countries, of course, hopefully will be roped in line for this to be done. Justice must really be served, and Africans deserve that dignity. And that's by way of the dialogue this morning. But before we go, special dedication to Marilyn Eni Ejay. Today is your birthday, Marilyn Eni Ejay. Today is your birthday. Happy birthday going out to you, Mary. This is coming from our own Selassie Azamati. He says, happy birthday to you. And he added something, I love you so much. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Selassie, for your message. You guys are doing well. And there is a big one. Today is the birthday of our very own Mr. Koshi Fiaka, the scintillating man. Koshi, wherever you are today, from the entire team here at Woezor, we say happy birthday to you. May God continue to bless you abundantly. More wisdom, more wealth, and good health. Thank you so much, and happy birthday to you, Koshi. Well, on this note, we draw curtains on today's edition of the Dialogue. A big thanks to the entire team for helping put this one together. Please, it's a weekend, and of course, football matches are on. The World Cup is still on. Yes, yesterday, our brothers, and I said it, for a fact that your brother has been a bad brother doesn't mean you should kick him out. A bad brother is still a brother, regardless. They were in action yesterday. Unfortunately, they couldn't garner the 3 maximum points as expected. But well, they still have some sort of chance in the World Cup. Let's see how the last round of games will go. But today, a lot of matches will be played again. And yours truly, WoezorTV, we've got you covered. So I don't know if you have it, if you can put it out on the screen so our viewers will know how the games will look like this today. So earlier this morning, we had a game where, it ended. Mexico played against, what's the name? They played at dawn, South Korea. But later, USA will play Australia at 7 p.m. USA versus Australia later this evening. Scotland will play Morocco as well later in the evening, 10 p.m. thereabout. So 7 p.m. USA will be on against Australia. 10 p.m. Scotland faces the Atlas Lion of Morocco. And all those games will be live on yours truly, just as you see them on the screen. Yours truly, WoezorTV, will bring you all the gist and updates on that. And watch out for the build-up to the games as well. The team will be here to serve you the best. Are you looking out for that female sports presenter on our airways? Charlie, you don't have to flip the channel. Keep it locked. May the weekend become the better for you as you sojourn to do all the other activities, especially the social gatherings as well. It's a weekend. Stay safe, stay out of trouble. Let's meet next week. My name is Randy Ahadzi. It's a wrap for now. Bye.
Well, not too long ago, the great President John Mahama went to the United Nations and spoke for my people of Jamaica and the Caribbean and the Americas. And you said, we are not looking a handout, but recognition of what took place in the transatlantic slave trade. I thank you, my president. I am a child who suffer from this. Chains on my feet, whip in the hand. And tonight I sing a song to go along with your mission of reparations. Not a handout, but to acknowledge. But we're gonna do it not just reggae style, we're gonna do it high life. A high life remix by me, Graham Smargan of Morgan Heritage. Oh, President Mahama, I thank you for saying what you said at the United Nations. Reparations, justice must come. Africa and the Caribbean as one. Zimbabwe, not charity, but exposing them both. Now a new day of justice is born. Across the ocean, torn from the land. Chains on my feet, whip in the hand. But your light carried us through the storms. Now a new day of justice is born. Reparations, justice must come, yeah. Africa and the Caribbean as one. Not charity, but exposing them both. Now a new day of justice is born. Reparations, justice must come. Africa and the Caribbean as one. Not charity, but exposing them both. Now a new day of justice is born. Africa crying out loud. Now a new day of justice is born. Mahama, I give you strength From Ghana to Zimbabwe, we thank you for holding the way. We say, Mahama, justice must come. Africa and the Caribbean as one. I say from Jamaica.